Hi and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave and this is episode 958B, and today's date is April 29th, 2016, and the title of the episode is EU police carried out assault exercises for civil unrest in Germany and other EU countries. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, the U.S. government and many governments around the world, they don't want the people to have the ability to have weapons. Now, people say, oh, what's the big deal? Why do they care about this? Well, because a population with a weapon is a population that can't be controlled. A population that does not have weapons can be controlled. And this is why the Founding Fathers had the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and then they had the Second Amendment to back up that freedom. And we see that the administration, and many administrations going back, they wanted to remove weapons from the people. And we've seen a lot of false flags trying to scare the people into saying, see, guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad. But gun is an inanimate object. People do bad things. People can use knives, bats. They can make explosives. But they don't want to hear about those stories because they're more worried about the weaponry. And we see Obama right now, he announced new steps Friday to help curb gun violence. And he realizes at this point, through all these false flags, that he just can't get any of the legislation passed that would infringe on the Second Amendment, because they just can't get rid of the Second Amendment. The people throughout the whole entire country would have to voice their concerns. It would have to go to each state, and each state would then have to vote to add or remove an amendment. But we see at this point that Obama announced new steps Friday to help curb gun violence, including by identifying the requirements for smart guns. And what they're trying to do with smart guns right now is they're trying to get everyone to have a weapon that is controllable. Now, they can shut them off, they can turn them on. And of course, I guess there are some models that have a bracelet on it, so you can use the weapon. Some, it has to understand and read your fingerprints. And we can see that this way, they would have full control over the weapon. And to them, this is a better idea because this way, yeah, have your weapons. We'll just shut them off when we have to. And what they're doing right now to get gun manufacturers to do this is that the Defense Department will continue to help manufacturers test firearms, the smart firearms, under real-world conditions. And they will also give gun makers cash prizes through the program for them to make these type of weapons. Now, what we see right now is that the Obama administration, and it's not just him, it's the central bankers, they want full control of the people. They realize that the economy is falling apart. They realize there's going to be rioting. They realize the people are going to be a threat to their authority. And what we need to think of right now is think about this. Our government and other governments around the world are telling its people guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad. But they're using weapons, and a lot of times covertly, in other countries, and they supply them to individuals to overthrow governments. Think about that for a second. Let's use Syria, for example. They had protests in the beginning. It didn't work. So they gave the people weaponry. And again, it wasn't a grassroots uprising. These are paid mercenaries. But they gave these mercenaries weaponry to overthrow Assad. Why didn't they give them knives? Or DHS, they tell us to use scissors or why don't they hide under a desk? No, they gave them weapons because they're showing the world this is how you overthrow a government when you don't want a government. Weapons allow you to take out a government that is not working for your best interests. Or weapons are used, in the case of Syria, to take out a government where the United States wants to do a regime change. So they're telling the people of their countries, Canada, Australia, weapons are bad, but we will give weapons to these people so we can get rid of that government. Very interesting. Now, we've talked about how countries are training for civil disobedience. And out in Europe, the European police, they have carried out assault exercises intended to crack down on civil unrest in Germany and other EU countries. The scenarios under which they are carrying out these exercises are based upon civil war-like conditions. And as we know, they realize that the people, when the economy crashes, they're going to be very upset. There are going to be riots. They're going to go after the government officials. There's going to be civil unrest. They know this. This is why they have been practicing. This is why they're having these false flags. Part of the agenda to put more military police, on the ground here in plain sight, ready to go. And every time a government does this, it fails because there's a lot more of us than there is of them. And throughout history, the people ultimately win. As soon as the government turns its back on the people, and they see the people as an enemy, they use force on the people. And the people respond. And when the people respond, in the millions, governments are overrun. So we are seeing in Europe, they're training. Here in the United States, they've been purchasing a lot of the equipment to handle civil unrest. They've been training. The White House is building the fence 5 feet higher. More guards are being placed in front of government buildings. What we're seeing right now is preparation for worldwide civil unrest. Because the governments of the world, the central banks of the world, they know this is where we're headed. Because this entire system is falling apart. It's collapsing. Now, out in Ukraine, the southeastern region, they want a ceasefire during Easter. And they've called on Kiev to say, okay, during the holidays, let's decide that we have a ceasefire at this point. Now, we haven't heard from the Kiev government forces, and we'll have to see how that turns out. But very interestingly, Poroshenko, he put out an order to kill the heads of both DPR and LPR, Alexander Zakharchenko and Igor Plotninsky. Both of these individuals are head of the Donetsk and Lugansk area, and Poroshenko has put out a hit on them. So I don't think they're going to be fulfilling the Minsk II ceasefire agreement at this point. It looks like they're trying to stir things up once again. And we're going to have to watch this situation very closely. Now, out in Armenia, it looks like the United States, they are pushing regime change once again. If you remember back to 2015 with the electric bills, where they had protests out in Armenia, the U.S. was backing that, trying to push that into some type of political movement, then to have regime change. And it looks like they're trying once again, because as we know, Russia, they have a military base in Armenia. It is in a strategic location. The U.S. wants it. And we see that they're building friction in this area along with Turkey. And what we're seeing is this person, David Sanasarian. He decided to take a couple of eggs and throw them at the Russian embassy. Now, it looks like, once again, because he kind of started what was going on with the electric bills, he was kind of involved in that, and it looks like he's doing this once again. Now, we see that David Sensarian is an opposition politician with the Heritage Party who helped lead the previous electric Yerevan protest in the mid-2015. He is also an associate of the Armenian-based National Citizens Initiative. The NCI is coordinating and receiving aid from U.S. National Endowment for Democracy. The U.S. NED is chaired by a pro-war corporate financier representatives. And we know who these people are, like George Soros. He is also on the board of trustees of Armenia Institute of International and Security Affairs. And it was revealed in 2015 that during the electric Yerevan, protests at that time were led by U.S.-funded and directed non-governmental organizations. And he was involved in this. And it looks like the same thing is happening once again. They're looking for regime change. Now, we understand that Sweden might join NATO, and Russia is saying if Sweden decides to join NATO, they're going to be putting military next-gen missiles in the north area of Russia to combat this. Now, we can see at this point that NATO, the U.S., they are definitely provoking Russia. They're encircling Russia. And every time this happens, Russia or China, they counter and do something. And they put up defensive weapons. Not offensive, but defensive type of weapons. And of course, the U.S. then goes out and says, look what they just did. But they didn't tell the whole entire story. And this is exactly what we're seeing at this point. So this is something that we need to watch, because if Russia all of a sudden puts up these missiles, it's because Sweden joined NATO. And then all of a sudden you see military assets come in, you see a missile shield come in, and then everything else happens to continually provoke Russia over and over and over. Now, the U.S. is moving drones, and they're flying them over Libya right now. Now, the United States, they are flying over Libya to gather intelligence for military strikes. So they're already mapping out the area. We know France has been flying reconnaissance missions over Libya, and it looks like they are getting prepared and ready to go into Libya. And this most likely is going to happen as we move into late spring and summer. It looks like this is what they're positioning for. We understand the warships are coming down into Libya. They'll be off the coast in about 3 or 3.5 months right now. That's the schedule. Something we need to really watch. Now, we understand out in Syria, a hospital was hit. And of course, as soon as it happened, the U.S. came out and said it was Syria, it was Russia. And now we're getting other information once again. And Russia is providing this information. And they're saying they have satellite information that shows, yes, the United States had planes over the area, A-10s. They were flying above Aleppo, flying in that area and bombing. And they destroyed 9 facilities in that area, and most likely it was the hospital as one of them. And 13:55 Moscow time, 2 American A-10 assault aircraft entered Syrian airspace from Turkey, flew right to the city of Aleppo, and bombed targets there. So once again, just like in Afghanistan, just like in Yemen, the U.S. is using propaganda. And Russia and Syria said, well, it couldn't have been us because we didn't have planes in the area at that time. So once again, we are seeing the U.S. trying to use the propaganda, destroying the infrastructure, hitting civilians, and blaming it on the other side. And eventually what's going to happen is they're going to get caught again, just like they did in Afghanistan. And now they're going after those individuals, of course the low-level people, that were following orders. They're the ones they're going to attack. And we see right now the same thing most likely is going to happen. Now, the Syrian army, they've confiscated about 141 stolen relics. They were being transported to Lebanon from Syria. They were caught, and these were going to be sold and brought to Turkey. So we know where the relics are going. We know where the oil is going. It seems that it goes to Turkey. And at this point, Turkey, the United States, Israel, the coalition forces, all part of the master plan. They fund the Islamic State, they fund Al-Qaeda, they fund al-Nusra, they fund the Free Syrian Army that switches back and forth into each one of these terrorist groups. And we see at this point that Russia and Syria, they are making a huge amount of gains in the country, and the United States and Russia agreed to a 24-hour ceasefire in Aleppo, in Damascus. And what they're doing at this point is they want Russia not to go into Aleppo at this time, because they are preparing for a major offensive in this area. They're also preparing for a major offensive in Raqqa. And this is why we see the U.S. troops in Raqqa, because they can't let the Syrian government, the Russian Air Force, move into these areas, because they know the Islamic State will be completely wiped out and the troops will then move into these areas. And this is why they're placing the U.S. soldiers in this area and saying, no, we're protecting the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army is in this location. And again, that is one agenda for the soldiers. Another agenda is most likely to go after Assad. I mean, because that's their main goal. Now, we understand a lot of the coalition forces, they are bringing in military assets. They're bringing in troops. They're going to be fighting. Of course, they call it the Islamic State, but we know what they're really there for. Australia, they have left open the door to extend its combat operations against the Islamic State in the Middle East. So if peace talks break down, they have extended their troops, their military assets in this location, and they said they'll be going after Assad. Well, they say the Islamic State, but they're really going to be going after Assad in Syria, just like the other coalition forces. Now, we understand Russia wants Turkey to shut down their borders, and Russia wants international observers on the border of Turkey. Turkey says absolutely not. Now, the Red Cross is saying, well, we should be able to go up to the border and monitor that area for all the refugees and what is happening in that area. And Turkey right now says we do not want the Red Cross in this area whatsoever, because they're very nervous and afraid what they would find out. And what they would find out is that they're supporting the Islamic State. Weapons are moving in and out of Turkey, and they don't want anyone in this entire area, because you have to remember, they're building a safe zone, or John Kerry calls it zones of interest, and they are building the bases, the two bases that are up in northern Syria. They're extending the runway. They're doing this on purpose to bring in fighters and transport planes. They're maneuvering troops into this area. We know the U.S. has given Turkey more missile technology to put on their border. It has a longer reach to protect that area. And what we're seeing right now is they are getting prepared and ready. Germany is upgrading the base in Incirlik, and bringing in tornadoes, bringing in troops. We see it all happening at the same time right now. All of this is occurring all at the same time, because what they're doing, they are getting ready to go after Assad. This is their main objective. It's not to get the Islamic State. It's not to have peace. It's not to have a ceasefire. And what we're looking at right now is the last-ditch attempt of the United States government central bankers to start a war. And they want a war with Russia. I don't even think it's going to even help at this point to remove Assad, because they're never going to get into Iran. They were supposed to have this done by 2008. We are now in 2016, 8 years out. They were supposed to have Syria and Iran regime changed. And at this point, The economy is crashing very rapidly. At this point, I don't even think it'd make a difference if Assad is removed, because there's no way they'll be getting into Iran. And Russia is involved right now. And I think what they're doing is they're building up at this point, and they're trying to provoke Russia into doing something under the illusion of this ceasefire peace talk that's going on here. And it's a very difficult situation because they can't make it look like the U.S. is the aggressor, even though the U.S. is the aggressor. They need to make it look like Russia did something in this area. And I see Russia as being very, very careful. I mean, we saw Turkey, they shot down a Russian plane, and they thought, listen, if we shoot down a Russian plane, they will definitely react and go after Turkey and, maybe bomb or fire at one of their planes. But they did not do this. They were not provoked. And I see at this point, they're going to try to provoke Russia in some way, somehow, into firing or doing something. And if they can't do this, they're going to move to country like North Korea, China, but they're going to try to provoke one of these countries. And as we move into the summer months, as we get closer to that period of where Obama is left alone in the White House and Congress takes vacation, this is the time frame that we're looking at where they're going to try to push this as hard as they can. Now remember, every plan does not work out for them. Things don't always go smoothly. Listen, they were supposed to have Iran and Syria conquered by now. I mean, it was supposed to happen in 2008, and look, we're in 2016. But I think they're going to have a last-ditch effort, and they're going to go all out in the summer. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.